Welcome, folks, to another episode of the HiTech Podcast. Very excited. If you're listening, you know that this is a regular episode. It's nothing out of the ordinary. But if you're watching, you're already cued into the fact that this is a guest episode, and we're very excited to have Priten Shah back to speak with us. Forgive me, Priten Soundar-Shah. Got a whole new change. We'll come into that in a little bit. You know, gotta have some speed bumps. You can't just drive at full speed. But before we jump to you in 1 second, if you like this episode, or if you're interested in following more information about Priten, about the book we're about to talk about the HiTech Podcast, head over to hitechpod.us. Find us on all the socials. Follow us at HiTech Pod or HiTech Podcast, and reach out, inbox at hitechpod.us if you'd like to learn more about Priten's work or anything else about the podcast. Now, that's us out of the way. Priten, welcome back. Last time we had you on was episode 133, and this will be episode 238. I can't even imagine it's been 2 years. How are you?
We're super close to exactly 100 episodes. Sorry.
Yeah, that's impressive. That was not on purpose. So I'm kind of glad that worked out that way.
We'll schedule you in for 3:30 a couple, right?
Yeah. Exactly. I'll just keep, when I see the episode pop up, I'll be like, it's time to reach out to them again. No, but thank you so much for having me back. I'm excited for this. It was a blast last time, and I'm sure we'll have a blast again today.
Yeah, we've always had, we find that we find folks all over the world, and then they become friends. We're just very happy to make the acquaintance of good people. In that episode, we talked about your last book, AI and the Future of Education. Nothing's happened since then.
Yeah. It's basically been stagnant, right, man? That's basically
complete plateau. We've just been
easy,
sitting around. Yeah, exactly.
Before we jump to ethical EdTech, right? What's coming out in front of us? What's happened, right? Did that book do well? Have you spun off 5 different AI companies? What's going on?
Yeah. Gosh, okay, so this is a complicated question. The book did well, for what I was expecting.
Awesome.
We got translations in some interesting languages. I think we got Vietnamese and Mandarin and Turkish and Arabic.
Okay.
Yeah, it was not the list of languages I expected to be the first, but it's cool. I'm glad folks found it interesting in those in those areas, countries. But so yeah, it's been exciting. The biggest thing I think that's happened is just a lot more very quickly. And I think that's in general. There was a lot I talked about in the book that I thought, this is going to happen at some point, and it all kind of just happened. And so we've been kind of figuring out what this means for the speed at which we adapt in education. But I got a chance to speak to educators all around the country and world on initially what their hesitations were with AI, and that was interesting because it was much more of a here's how the tech works, here's how here's some cool things you can do with it, and I enjoyed that because it gave me a chance to put on my technologist hat, but also kind of share something cool and fancy. It's always more fun to be talking about the positives and kind of say, here's this really cool thing you can do with this thing. And that I spent a good 1.5, 2 years doing that since that book came out. And I know that we'll get to this in a little bit, but I think at some point I was like, oh gosh, people took this really seriously and are moving really fast. And the problem kind of flipped. It went from everybody moving really slow to moving really fast. And I was like, okay, gosh, I gotta come back to this, the other side a little bit and slow folks down. So that's kind of a big picture overview, but we can dig into it.
I love that. Let me write a book. Speed up. Oh no. Let me write a book. Yes. Slow down.
It's okay, we hit the gas a little too hard, folks. I'm curious, man, because obviously, Will and I keep joking on the podcast. Now, the joke for us has been people, if you stop listening to it, will stop talking about it. But I feel like all I've done is talk about AI for the last, for us especially, probably the last 1.5 years. I feel like has been nonstop AI conversations. And I've seen a lot of change in education and a lot of different reactions to it. When you're saying a lot changed really fast, what were some of the kind of top things that you're seeing that you're man, this happened way faster than I expected it to, or kind of the area you saw people hit the gas that you're I did not expect us to get here so quickly.
Yeah. No, that's good. So I think the first part of this was it went from being a conversation largely about plagiarism and detection to becoming very quickly about how do we integrate this in every single possible way. And that's a massive like turning point or change rather. And so like the kind of conversations that I think I wasn't fully expecting to happen this quickly are completely questioning the relevance of everything we do at all in education and the value of it. So I thought we were a little farther away from that. I think that the large scale contracts between school districts and universities and the large AI companies was definitely a moment where I was like, oh, like we're no longer in control of this narrative anymore. Like this is not coming from the education side. This is coming from the tech side. And I think that flip was one of the ones where I started to get a little bit more cautious was what they started to control the narrative very explicitly. Whereas before it was kind of like, oh, like, what do educators want to get from the tech companies? Now it's like tech companies knocking on your door saying, take it all. And that was definitely a big change. And then of course, everything's just getting better and faster and more powerful. And so, like the amount of changes we've seen in just the last 6 months, and I'll be at a PD event and there'll still be folks who think that AI can't do math. And this is like, and it's the reality. Like, I don't know, like folks can't really keep up with all the, no one can keep up with the developments, right? Like realistically, like I'm sure I've missed a million things in the last like 2 weeks.
Right. Yeah.
And this is like all I do. And so like, if you're teaching like, US history, I don't know when you would like go and see what other capabilities the models have developed. But they have gotten better, right? Like they've gotten way better at the deep reasoning models, I think, in particular were a good turning point. I think the agents has kind of been like the thing that every time I mention it in a room with teachers, I know I'm hated. Like that is definitely a moment where they're like, stop. Like we're barely like dealing with the other part of this. Can we not? I think there's some fear, right? Like the students can now just like say, "Oh, go take this whole course online," and I think that scares folks. It scares me. So I think that's kind of the biggest change has been the pace keeps quickening, and I don't think we're fully understanding it at the same rate. But also trying to keep up with it by bringing it everywhere. It's like such a mess. It's like a mess is probably the short answer.
Oh, wow.
We within a few episodes of yours, 133, 147 was a conversation with Simon Nicholas from Archer. Archer no longer exists, so that's of course one of those things in the span of AI and changes, right? But that was a math tutoring platform, and that was the thing they were saying at that time. He's like, we still have humans check every math equation because we can't trust it. And it's like today, maybe the high maths, but like arithmetic is done. I don't think twice about asking it to help me with arithmetic. So you're right. Like, holy smokes, is stuff speeding along in that capacity. And
and your comments
here
about the agents in those conversations. I've been in those scenarios too. It's interesting to see that happen. Mine was not an agent conversation. It was where we started to tell instructors about and faculty members about like AI browsers, like Perplexity's Comet and things like that. And like, I remember the visible moment describing that to someone and just like seeing the drop happen of like, oh, I thought all we had to deal with was chatbots. You're telling me this thing can just like edit sites, like the okay. The contract thing is interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting note about that moving as quick. I didn't think about that until you just mentioned that, but that happens so much faster than I probably expected as well, which is like, especially like OpenAI and some of those companies getting into like Canvas just announced Instructor just within the last year announced a giant contract deal with OpenAI, and they're like plugging it into the entire LMS. That's a lot more than I think any of us expected when we talked 2 years ago about AI this quickly.
Yeah, and it's bizarre. And I think that the Canvas integration in particular really bothers me because like we're seeing lots of university faculty struggle with the fact that like these browser bots and agents can go and do things on Canvas. And there's lots of other folks in the space who are working on advocacy to get them to like stop it. Like this is really within the control of AI companies. They could really easily put in a guardrail that says, don't do assignments for students on Canvas. Like we have a massive contract with this company. We maybe ought not like make them irrelevant. But it's such a bizarre, like, I don't know what game they're playing, but it's on both sides. And it's I'm curious what their long game is here. But those are the kinds of things that are frustrating because it's such an easy thing for them to make the education part of this much easier. And they're refusing to do it while pretending to be an ally, which is just like, Bizarre.
This is a plenty obvious enough sequitur though to bring us to ethical EdTech, right? I can't imagine it's the only thing the book's about, but like we're raising questions of ethics while we're even discussing this. What brought this about? What brings ethical EdTech, the book, to being?
Yeah, I mean, largely this. I think the starting to realize that, oh gosh, like we are not thinking critically about what we want for education. I think that was kind of what was the initial impetus for starting to have the conversation. So I think this started as like, oh, I'm going to redo my PD to actually bring in a lot of my philosophy background. And this is like my inner core of how I think about these things. And I just like kind of shut them out because, you know, what folks wanted for the first few years was like, oh, how does this stuff work? And I was like, oh, well, yeah, I can explain how it works. Like, here you go.
Right.
But deep down, I was, you know, like my philosophy side was there and I was thinking about all these things. And I think there was a moment where I was like, oh, teachers are actually very receptive to having those larger conversations now. And that was really motivating. I think that when I realized that I could walk into a room with teachers and they were no longer so hyperfixated on the assessment piece of this, which still a concern, still things we're figuring out, but they're noticing that there's like larger questions we need to be asking to navigate this for you know, the coming future. And so philosophy, I think, is a great way to do that. Biased, but and in the way it, you know, like I think one of the problems we have in education in particular are that we kind of shy away from talking about values and like what undergirds our education system as a whole, when it's really the core of it, right? Like the reason we fund public education, the reason we structure universities the way we do in the country, those there's like massive value commitments that undergird that.
Yep.
And if we kind of slow down, if you think about what that means for how we approach decision making, I think we would be making a lot of different decisions. So that's the book's goal. It was scary for me because, again, it's a very different style of writing than the first book. The first book was more of a how-to, like, here's screenshots of how this thing works. And it was, you know, obviously I'm proud of it and it did something, but it just wasn't like the kind of, you know, personal intervention in the field that I think I was, like that book really did. It was really just like a translation of what was possible. This one is kind of me saying, well, here's what things ought to look like. And that's really hard to do and put out there permanently, you know, physical thing that everybody's going to have hopefully everybody's going to have in their pocket. So it was challenging. It still is challenging to even think about it. And the other part of this is, I think folks in general, like there's folks who want to ask the big questions and then they're just like, I don't have the energy to ask the big questions. And my goal isn't to just speak to the folks who want to, like, you know, have the time or want to make the time for it. We really need everybody to be asking these questions. And so I've tried to make this philosophy like a crash course. Like it is bare minimum. What do you need to know from, like, you know, ethics and political philosophy and education philosophy to kind of be having the relevant conversations that we need to be having tomorrow, and not like, you know, I'm going to sit in this room and, you know, smoke a cigar and talk to other philosophers. Not the vibe that the book is going for. And then the second, so that's the first third of the book. The second third of the book kind of talks about how we can build better infrastructure in our schools to create policies that are ethical. And again, this is not like, oh, how do you make a very specific tech policy? It's more, what are the procedures we put in place to make sure that the policies we come up with are from an ethical standpoint. So that's kind of the second third. And then the final part is practice. And so the book as a whole, I give no answers. And again, people
Spoiler
hating me
alert.
is clearly a theme today, and that is yeah, exactly. Okay, I'm not as hated as I'm making it sound today, but you know, there is some reality to the fact that, like, I can't answer all the questions folks really hope I provide easy answers to. And so the book does take a stance that, like, a lot of this is context specific. I borrow from bioethics. We can talk about that if we get to it. But the context specificity of this means that, like, folks need to kind of practice the skill set. And so the third section of the book is case studies. And so they're real stories of ethical dilemmas that teachers that I interviewed over the last summer have faced in their actual classrooms, or things that headlines that were made that I found really interesting. And it kind of breaks it down into a hypothetical scenario. It's fictionalized, and they kind of puts the onus on the teacher to kind of reason through how they might approach that scenario, to kind of give them an opportunity to practice that kind of ethical reasoning.
Okay. So one might argue the real
before.
teacher tactic, like the don't give the answers, get them to reason, there on their own. I love that. That's super cool. I'm just gonna ask the question because Will put it as a question in our notes the second you said it. You just dropped bioethics, and I'm pretty confident Will and I have no idea what the heck you're talking about. So I had other questions I was going to go to, but I'm going to immediately just ask you, what is bioethics? And how does it connect into this conversation? Will, was that what you were going to ask? Or are you just putting bioethics?
I wrote it.
You already know.
I wrote it.
You already know the definition?
For a reason.
Okay, we're good.
No, I know, Josh. I wanted to make sure.
Oh, yeah, you wanted to make sure I do. Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
You're quizzing me.
Yes, clearly.
Perfect. All right, let's see if I pass this. All right, I'll take a step back. Medicine as a field did not have a formal structure of ethics for a long time. And I think when folks think about medicine, they think that ethical decisions are part of how doctors are trained. But that's like 1970s, 1980s. That's when we first started formally thinking about what it means to make ethical decisions in medicine. A lot of that has to do with some of the really messed up research studies that come out around that time period that are really exploitative. And that kind of starts to say, oh, we need to create a system of making sure that our medical spaces are thinking ethically. So they start to build this whole field. There's an academic field that comes with it, and hospitals actually have ethics officers, and they train every single doctor in bioethics. And it's kind of bizarre to me, and this is not an original idea of mine. This is there's a philosopher who used to be at Harvard, who's now at Stanford, who basically says that we need to do the same thing for education. We need to kind of bring in a formal field of ethics for the field, because we're also making really important decisions on the fly, and we ought to have systems in place at our schools to do that, and we should train every single teacher in the background that it takes to make those decisions. So that idea I've been sold on for a long time. I was exposed to her writing in college. And then the EdTech part of this just makes it so much more obvious. And that to me is this is a perfect opportunity. So, and I say this in the book pretty explicitly, my goal with the book is not to just talk about EdTech ethics. It's can we think about ethical decision making in education as a whole? But I'm hoping I can kind of get it in the door by making it about EdTech, because that's the problem of the hour. Everybody's trying to figure out how to navigate it. And I think that rather than saying, we should rethink how we do grades or how we do disciplinary policies or how we do school lunches, the EdTech stuff does start the conversation much more easily. And so that's kind of the approach the book takes. I'm wondering if I want to do more bioethics stuff with y'all. Really quick, I will.
Yeah, go for it.
Just because y'all asked, you opened a rabbit hole. So,
we love our rabbit holes.
In bioethics, there's one particular strand that's really popular, and the approach that that strand takes is let's come up with 4 principles that kind of help us navigate all the kinds of dilemmas that doctors might face. And so the principles are are we doing something good by doing this thing? Are we preventing harm? This is the do no harm principle. Are we making sure we respect the autonomy of the patient, and are we doing this in a way that's fair to our community? So that to me, it's this is doctors are trained on this in med school, and it's a good little mental heuristic for them to think about when they're making pretty big decisions on the fly. We ought to borrow a lot of that for education, and there's so many overlaps, right? A lot of the decisions we make in education are super context specific. It's not you can have one right answer for organ donation across the country, and you can't really have one right answer for your AI tutor across the country. It depends on who exactly is in your classroom, what resources do you have, what does your community look like, right? There's all these factors that are really specific to the individual decision in the moment that medicine and education both have in common. And so this is why I think borrowing a framework of thinking is much more effective than saying, okay, here's what I think all the answers are. It's not going to stand the test of time or really location or anything. It's just not going to be they're going to be okay, you said stuff and it's really just not true. And so we need to think about how we think about these questions. The final piece of this is that I also incorporate a care principle that I think is unique to education that medicine doesn't necessarily need. And my quick way of illustrating this is if your appendix needs to be taken out and you really hate your surgeon can take out your appendix and you'll go home healthier than you were before, no problem. No matter how much you hate your surgeon, will not make a difference in terms of the outcome. If you really hate your history teacher, you are not going to go home with the exact same outcomes, right? You might in that year struggle that year, but it might as well change how you think about history for the rest of your life, right? The kind of relationship we have with our educators is actually much more important because we spend a lot more time with them. It's not just a 1 hour appointment once a year scenario you are often in front of your teacher every day. And so I think we need to center the relationship as the fifth principle, and make sure that every action we're taking strengthens relationships and doesn't weaken them. So that's kind of the approach that the book advocates for and kind of tries to borrow from bioethics.
The principles themselves are fantastic, and of course, like you said, not original, but as you're listing each of the four, I was like, wouldn't it be great if those principles were being used when considering where to put a data center, or whether or not we should change our language, the size of our language models, or what we're doing. I'm like, there's so many parts to what we're doing just around AI before we even touch the EdTech space, where it's like those principles would significantly help humanity navigate this moment. Then you layer that on the EdTech side of it. It's like, the goal of the goal of education is transforming students' lives. I mean, that's, I think, something Josh and I at least share. And I think that's generally pretty good for most folks. Like, we are going to make them knowledgeable in something which should ultimately make them a different or better or greater person. But if we are doing something or bringing in implicit philosophies, inside of a tool or inside of another methodology that we're not aware of, that's becoming a part of our curricula, that's becoming a part of the school experience, it can have that negative effect without us ever trying maybe to. And we see that with just like issues of bias, issues with hallucinations, issues with, previously with math and accuracy, like AI has so many implicit issues that if we just drop it in a school, there may be problems. And so taking those principles as that buffer, here, let's all come up with this manifesto for the EdTech buffer and get these principles in place. Now, of course, folks should turn to your book and start there, because if you've written them down, sounds like a great place to get the ideas.
And I think the part that you just said, where it's like, there's a lot of this is just like, we talk about ethics really, really, like, everyone's talking about it, right? Like, you hear it from every single talking head that's out there, every single tech CEO, every single principal, superintendent. But ethics is not something that's just like a buzzword. Like, people have spent thousands of years thinking about what that means and how humans ought to approach those questions. And I think this is a great moment where we feel like, we have lots of stuff written on how to do this actually and effectively, to think about these questions. And so we do need just like generally more ethical reasoning skills, point blank, like just solve whatever problem. Like, it doesn't matter, like, we're here today talking about EdTech, but like, it would really help with a lot. Like, if we just slowed down and like spent, 3 hours reading the first section of my book, maybe. But
sounds
I feel like that's
start.
a great recommendation on starting. Just start reading down. Learn more about bioethics, dig into how it connects.
Please read. That's the lesson.
That's the lesson. But no, I'm listening to you talk about this, and then this conversation, right? It's one, full in agreement that ethics has become an interestingly like buzzword in the age of AI, especially, I think, in a way that we haven't seen in other places. It's kind of like pivot during COVID. But like, to your point, there's a lot more thought to
unprecedented.
This. Yes, or unprecedented. Okay, that word didn't need to be said. No,
we're tired of that word.
That hurts. I'm just joking. It's like your point. There's been a lot of thought about this, and over the years, from philosophy to a lot of other places, of what ethics looks like. Like, I remember sitting in ethics classes during different philosophy tracks I had over the years in college, and there's a lot of ways to think about this. There's a lot of people who have done different thinking, and I didn't know about it being connected in the bioethics part. I will fully go with Will. I really love that framework and how it connects to kind of undergirding what we're doing in education. But that was my immediate thought as you're talking, and probably obviously why you created Ethical EdTech as a book and direction, is over the years doing so much EdTech integration, whether it's been other tools or it's been the conversations around AI. Will and I have talked about this a lot on the podcast, that one of my bigger concerns in technology in general is that we don't always ask the question of like, okay, we can do this, but should we be doing this? Right. And I'm guessing probably you've been seeing a lot of that happening in the AI space of like, okay, we need to set up some ethics for ourselves, because if we don't, we're starting to like do a bunch of stuff with this tool that I don't know we've asked ourselves if we we should be. And again, those listening, that's coming from, like, I can't speak to I know from when last time you were on how much you were talking about AI usage and the investigation you've done and all that stuff. So like, I'm just going to speak for all three of us. This is coming from three different people that use AI. We're not like the curmudgeon saying, don't touch this tool, you know? So is that kind of what you're saying kind of is where your heart's been behind coming in this and seeing you're like, I'm seeing some places that maybe we should be pausing and thinking before we do this in education.
Yeah, the can versus should framework actually is exactly how I frame it in the introduction.
Okay.
And that's like it was a bizarre moment. Like I was in the middle of thinking about all of this, and I was presenting in Singapore, and my wife and I went to a bioethics exhibit.
Okay.
And like in huge letters, it's like, just because we can doesn't mean we should. And I was like, really simply put, like, right, like it's exactly that is like that's the message we all need to be thinking about. And I think that's also the transition from the first book to the second book. Like the first book was like, here's everything we can do, and now it's like, okay, which of these things should we do? Is kind of the second part of this. But no, you're absolutely right. I think we oftentimes get so sold on what is possible that we're not really asking what we actually need, what we ought to do in our schools, what the long-term implications are, because we do get caught up in like a sense of FOMO. Like that is very much part of this, is like folks are just feeling like if they don't immediately act on it, they will be left out, especially the university level. I think that's a lot of it. I think a lot of it is just like, oh my gosh, like this university now is like integrating AI, so of course we should too. And then I think part of it is also like we've given up so much of the agency in terms of the conversations. Like most conversations with EdTech companies and tech companies are initiated by the tech companies, right? Like it's almost all outbound sales from the tech folks. And so they do the framing. Like it's like a yes or no, this tool, not a, oh, here's a problem I have to solve, what tools exist, which is what in an ideal world we would be doing in terms of approaching these problems. And we might even decide tech is not the right solution for some of them, but we don't get a chance to do that, right? Like it's constant. Like like the number of emails, I'm sure like the average, procurement officer or director of technology, superintendent, principal, like even teacher gets to just like try some tool, makes it always about like, oh, this tool or not this tool, and never like, oh, like how else might I solve this problem, because we're just inundated.
Yeah.
I can speak to that's very true, in case anybody was curious. As somebody who has like manager of instructional technology in his title, the amount of calls and emails myself and my team get, it's resulted in the unspoken rule, which is like if a tool person calls you, one, tell them you're not the right person, because I don't have budget to just buy tools, and two, don't pass them to another person. Don't do that to another person. Like just close the loop, end the call. Sorry. But yeah, no, you're right. We get so much of this where like, it's like, and this, like, it's funny over the years how my position has changed over this, where it's like when I first started getting into EdTech, how much I was just interested in like, okay, what can we use this tool for? What can we do this for? And then like you start to do more and more of it, and you're like, okay, we need to be way more thoughtful with this technology, because it has repercussions, good and bad. I mean, there's plenty of great things technology can do. There's also plenty of bad that it can do as well, mainly because that's what we do as humans. Plenty of good and plenty of bad. So, yeah. Oh man.
Well, I think that one of the things we come out of all of this moment, right, is we're constantly going up, we're constantly getting more. And not only do we need the critical thinking to process what's coming to us, but I think there's a lesson in what we're dealing with. Like, we can't control how many people reach out to us. We can't stop them from reaching out. But addressing that is still a part of the critical thinking. Like, I don't want to say just dump them all into spam, but there's things we can do to manage our notifications, our inboxes, our relationship to these companies that helps to put that buffer in place. Because, maybe in a sense of responsibility, folks like the three of us do act as a shield to folks who are not as informed or not as able in these spaces. And I think it is up to us in many ways to be advocating for better practices, putting better companies in front of folks, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a little bit of that. It's like, if we're going to get those calls, at least we need to have the critical thinking to process them coming in, consider whether or not it's useful, and then maybe or maybe not make those connections to people who do them. But one of the things that we don't get a chance to do, teachers, as much, is like you've pointed to, Priten, if my university system, I think Penn State University, huge, lots of campuses, lots of students, UCLA, it's the SUNY systems, right? If the system signs the $10 million contract, we all use ChatGPT now. There's no decisions being made. There's no opportunities to test 2 or 3 or 4. I can't get a specific tool that meets my specific need. I get handed this Swiss Army knife that's supposed to be able to do what it, and I think that's a bit of a frustration for folks in this moment where we maybe we want to play with more tools, or we want to be engaging with real options, and we don't get that chance. Would you say that that's an ethical concern? Is that something that's coming up for maybe administrators to consider, that they should be allowing that space? What do you think in that?
No, that's exactly it. I think so. There's a chapter in the book devoted to stakeholders and the importance of integrating all different stakeholders in the conversation. And that's kind of largely the point is, can we stop making top-down policies on everything? And look, at the end of the day, top-down policies aren't always bad.
But I want to be preach it. I'm just going to add that there and then continue whatever you're going to go with next.
But the top-down policies can be really useful. And oftentimes, especially with something new like this, there are teachers who would appreciate some guidance from, and they often are lamenting that they aren't getting enough guidance that is top-down. But there's a big difference between top-down guidance that's creating large guardrails and creating protective infrastructure, and ones that are creating such confined rules and regulations that it doesn't allow the teacher to make the individual decisions there's a much more gray area than some of these policies often leave the room for. And that's what you're pointing out. I think that maybe a top-down policy that's we're not going to use free AI tools because privacy. Great, that probably should be a top-down policy. There should probably be even better top-down policy from the federal government about other regulations that protect us from the technology. But we're dreaming today. But
they're too busy kicking them out for not doing automated weapons. Sorry, we just did an episode on it. I'll make a joke about it.
Actually. So yeah, and so that is part of it. Is I think I hope that we can start to figure out which things ought to be individual educator decision making.
Yeah.
Again, the reality is the ethics and ethical change doesn't happen overnight, and I think that's something that I've had to really cope with as a philosopher who's trying to speak to an active practicing teacher and not other philosophers. Is I can sit here and talk all day about what I think that this utopia would be if philosophers were in charge of everything, but that doesn't really help us tomorrow. And so I think this is where, when we're thinking about ethical infrastructure in general, it has the baby steps oftentimes is all we can do, and getting control of what realm of within our realm of control, making ethical decisions is often a good first step. And so we should keep advocating for larger change, right? That is never, especially when you're working in an unethical system, we do have an obligation to keep advocating, outsiders, inside, everybody. When you see something that's unethical, say something, right? That is a pretty good maxim to live your life by. But at the same time, you can't just say, the whole system is so messed up that I'm not even going to think about the ethics of this decision I'm making tomorrow. You have to do both at the same time. And so even that professor who maybe has qualms with using OpenAI, they still have decisions that they're making tomorrow about how much it's going to be integrated in the classroom, what are they going to say to students about it? At what points are they going to reframe assignments? How much of class time is going to be devoted to using it or talking about it? There's all these little decisions that are made, even within the context of these larger policies that are oftentimes forced on educators, that still have ethical implications that we can reclaim some control over. And I think that's kind of the hope in the book is, let's start there and then let's keep pushing for more control so that we can keep making better decisions long term.
I'll make a brief, disclaimer statement before I get into this. What I'm about to say is a statement of belief of mine, William Illingworth, maybe not even the HiTech Podcast, and therefore does not reflect Preten's opinion.
This is gonna be wild.
But I want to
HiTech Podcast, which means he's not confident what I think on this. That's not.
You got it.
Buckle up, folks.
This doesn't need to make it into a social media clip, but considering ethics, and we look at Anthropic, right? Anthropic is doing moves right now that have brought them to the forefront of this conversation. They're taking ethical stances and trying to help guide the conversation at a government level, right? By stating we don't want to do these two things. We don't want this to be what our tool is a part of, right? They're taking a stance. They're at the same time. So I'm oh, this is exciting. Anthropic, good job. At the same time, they're also known for having stolen 700 million books. When we discuss ethics. And that's why I don't know if you have good relationships with companies and this and that, but like from the outside looking in, right?
Absolutely not.
If Anthropic wants to talk to Priten, you can find him, or us. But like you got an ethical decision there. If you want to take if you wanted to be able to say, I want to use a company that's ethically positive, I'm not sure that Anthropic is. Right? They may be becoming ethically positive. Hopefully they do. They lost their court case, so hopefully they pay remuneration to those that they've damaged. But that doesn't excuse stealing 700 million books. But now, so there's this own ethical issue, right? And that's just one company. That's just one, thing that's going on. But like, we can't just ignore this. And if someone came to me, right? My wife's in the financial industry, and she regularly will have conversations with folks about like, I want to make ethical decisions with my money. Cool. That's possible. It's very hard, right? Even if you decide I'm only going to take stocks in these two companies, do you know truly the ethics of those two companies? If you're excluding others for ethical reasons, like it's a gray area. It's a thing we have to learn to balance. And I hope that I suspect that's a big part of your book, but it's like, we can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater in another sense.
Yeah. I think that the Anthropic case also was a little frustrating to me because the bar is set so low. And I think that there's like this ethics washing that happens because of that, because like there's lots of ethical questions about how the algorithms were developed, whether it be the copyright infringement, or like the human reinforcement learning and what the folks are exposed to in developing countries in order to get the algorithms to actually be trained. There's also like a lot of like when you look at the post that they put out in response to being listed as a supply chain risk, he's like, oh, we have so much more in common with the Department of War than we don't. And I'm like, really? Like, what do you have in common with the Department of War? Like, please do share that, right? Like, I would like to know that if I'm going to, like, it's just like, it gets hidden because they're just like, oh, they're not open AI. But it's like, okay, but he's also saying that he agrees with 99% of the Department of War. Like,
right.
It's like, this is not ethical reasoning, right? Like, it is very much a marketing ploy. And so this is where, again, like, we can say this was a moment of ethics and everybody's like, Claude's on the top of the like list. But it's like, this was a very, very great marketing move at the end of the day, and they use this like very small hill that they refuse to do, die on. Don't refuse to die on. I totally messed that metaphor up, but they're
that's
using
my
that.
Thing.
But they're it's great. They're capitalizing on it. And that's kind of what they're good at. But I think in general, like if you look at the nuance of like how when you look at their like approaches to consciousness and like how they're viewing that and how they're like framing consciousness to the average user, like there's a lot of more insidious things that are not ethically like obviously good that's coming from Anthropic. And this is every AI company, like Anthropic's getting the heat right now for me because like everyone's pretending that they're amazing, and maybe they're better than OpenAI, maybe, but like that, what does that really mean is the question, right? Like how much does that justify us using it for everything, right? Like, and I think that's where the trade-off question comes in. Is like there are some of these technologies we will end up having to use because it ends up creating so much benefit for humans that like not using it because they have nefarious backgrounds will no longer be reasonable. And that's unfortunate, and I wish that was not the case, but drug trials is an example I saw someone bring up this week where like we have historic drug trials that were very, very messed up, and they took advantage of like the communities of color, in particular low-income communities. But we use those drugs. Like we still use those drugs. Like, right. Like we changed practices. We figured out how to make things ethical going forward. Sometimes you try to figure out how to, figure out some retribution. That's oftentimes obviously not the case. And maybe like the $150 or whatever each author gets from Anthropic is like something. But again, like it really is about, okay, like how do we prevent something like this from happening in the future if it's relevant? And are we making decisions that like are weighing the benefits and the risks? But like, we have to set some boundaries, like, because at the end of the day, everything we do has some negative ethical implications. I have AirPods on, Apple's not great. Like I'm sure mining was everything we do does create some harm oftentimes. And I think it's about like harm mitigation, and we got to figure out what that looks like. for us as individuals, for us as an education system, like all of it.
Yeah. Feel free to
also
go ahead, Will.
Mine's just a funny quip. Okay, I've written down what you're going to come back for on episode 335, and it's specifically to give us your hot take on image generation. We won't go into it today, but I'm going to hold the note.
That's definitely a high-tech hot takes episode that I would love to do. I was gonna say, feel free to respond to what I'm about to say with just read the book. But my one question for you is gonna be, as we were talking about a lot of this, the thought that keeps rolling through my head is like, I want to make sure to get his thoughts on, like, for the educator who's trying to wrestle through the ethics part, right? Of all, like, obviously we'll call it the sketchy routes of the last couple of years we've gotten to all of these different AI models, because I think you bring up a good point, right? It's like it's issues with Anthropic, issues with OpenAI. There's a lot of issues all over the place, right? And so somebody who's trying to look at this to be ethical, but also look at this to be like, I can't just sit on my hands and not engage with the tool to the level. If I'm hearing you correctly, a lot of what it seems like you're kind of recommending in this space is like, okay, we've had lots of historical examples of this where, like, eventually the findings, the things that we're doing are so good to the point that, like, we have to engage no matter what the history was of it. But what I'm hearing from you is kind of a push to say, okay, let's get these ethics right and try to change this moving forward. Like, how can we make sure whatever's happened to get us to where we're at right now doesn't happen again, and we don't do worse things with it? Is that fair to kind of say where you're coming from?
That's exactly fair. And I think there's this, like, I think it's legal philosophy. A legal philosopher wrote about this, but he's writing about it in the general context. So it's called the concept of tragic choices. And that's, like, the most interesting questions that we face right now. And oftentimes all the questions that the book is trying to help navigate are ones where, like, it's a lose-lose. And that is the reality of ethical decision making, is that, like, no matter what choice you make, you will have to accept some tragedy, right? Like, that is the most important decisions we make always come with a trade-off. And so it does come down to, like, which of these trade-offs are we willing to tolerate? And that's something that we ought to, like, ideally come to a consensus as a community. I think one of the things that the book tries to, like, double down on is that this is not like, Priten the king gets to decide where that boundary is, or what's what's allowed, what's not allowed, or exactly how this exact benefit weighs with this exact risk. But it's that, like, we live in a democratic society, we value democratic norms, and, like, education's a testing grounds for that, but also a training grounds for that for our students. And so we ought to approach this in that way within our school systems as well, and make sure that all the different voices are being incorporated. We're making sure everybody's educated on the topic so that they can provide an informed opinion, and then kind of make sure that we're building that consensus with parents, with teachers, with students, with the local community. Like, education is not something that happens in a vacuum. Like, you're not, like, it's not just student plus teacher. It has massive implications that reverberate, like, families, like, local communities, and, like, larger society. And so I think we this is where, like, again, I think there's a slogan here that we have to play, which is, like, we all need to talk more, like, about this and have these exact conversations, so that we can figure out where's my local school's hard line about, like, whether or not we're going to use OpenAI versus Anthropic or neither of them, right? Like, and I think this is where being in control of the narrative is so important, because we're, like, it's being framed as if, like, those are the only two options, right? Like, there's this idea that, like, oh, like, let's pick one of the AI models, but especially K-12 is a great example where, like, you can adapt to the changes that are happening in society, and you can talk about AI, and you can integrate, like, that into your curriculum without ever, like, paying OpenAI $1, like or any AI model $1, right? Like, I think that there's ways to not, like, you're not shoving your head in the sand and, like, saying, okay, like, because they're bad, I'm not gonna, like, think about them or talk about them. But there's ways, like, can I figure out ways to still get my students to also think about this critically, to understand why we as a school are not going to pay one of these AI companies, right? Like, those are all really important conversations that we could be having with our students. The final piece of this that I'll just say is that the harm mitigation part is really important. I think that, like, I know there's some folks who probably think that these are much harder, like, hard lines that we ought not cross, right? And so, and I think for me, like, I would rather get folks to cause less harm than stand so firm on the, like, do no harm principle, that, like, I don't get enough folks on board. And so, like, meat eating is one that I feel like that about, where there are folks who say, like, okay, any consumption of meat is bad. But I think that that's another one where, like, if you're thinking about this ethically, like, if you can eat one less meat dish a week, you're causing a little bit less harm. Like that's good. That's good for the environment. That's good for the animals, right? Like it doesn't have to be this all or nothing idea. Like if you decide you want to have meat whenever you're eating out, like whatever that looks like, this is a, whatever that looks like for you, you're reducing harm. And as humans, like it's going to be really hard for us to exist without causing any harm. And it's like, can we focus on reducing as much harm as possible, that in a sustainable way, right? Like I think that's the other important part. Is like we can all pretend that like we're all perfect and we're going to just tomorrow wake up and make every single decision in the ethically best way possible. But we're not going to last more than a day on those like principles, right? Like we will all fall apart. Yeah, like like breathing, I don't know, whatever, but like
well, what's what you consider harm, right? Like there's folks who would say like walking through grass could be harmful, you know, because you could step on insects. Respect if that's your philosophy, but like evaluating what harm is one of those steps philosophically to understand what level of harm you're going to participate in, because sometimes I will make kind of jokes with folks about the impact of humanity on the earth. Humanity is a virus to the earth, right? And so the more of us there are, the more damage we're doing. At the same time, I think that humanity has a high value, and it's a joke. I don't really fully believe
that's a
that,
Will opinion. Just like to note that.
Not a HiTech podcast
shared opinion. It's a Will opinion and also Ultron from the Avengers. I'm just tossing that out there. But
oops.
Sorry, man. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No,
that
you're
felt
good.
like an Ultron moment I could go with. No. Yeah. So okay, all of this is great, and I will say this here near the end. The clear before I ask like what's next. What are you doing from here from the book, and kind of what's your goal next? I will just say an obvious what's next is go find Ethical EdTech. We'll link to it on the show notes, all of those things. And please go check out this book. I am definitely going to be checking it out, man. I haven't checked it out before this other than to look at what you were doing on the update. I'll be fully honest. Although it seems like we keep touching on points in your book, which is just, he didn't pay us guys for that. He didn't pay us at all. Not that he should. So just a note, this is just pure belief from Will and Josh in what is being shared here. But what's next from here, right? So you've released the book, you're doing this. What's kind of
it releases soon, right?
Oh, that's right. It doesn't. Soon. Yeah, it's not out yet. That's right.
May.
Yes,
May 19th is when the book comes out. You can pre-order it now and you get a bunch of perks. Please do it. Salesy.
You get a free subscription to open it. No, I'm just joking.
No, also not disclaimer.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, so sorry, say that one more time for us. Release date is May
19th.
Okay, so check it out, May 19th. We'll link to the book. Make sure to go check it out because I can tell just from this conversation, this is timely. I appreciate you having this conversation going. I think it's really cool to see the movement of where you talk about using AI in education, showing all the possibilities, and see where things are going and see, you know what, maybe we need to take a not a complete break on what we're doing, but we need to get some foundational work and think through some things. So I really appreciate that, man. I appreciate what you're doing through this book, this conversation. And so everybody, please go check this out because I think this is a really timely conversation in the midst of what we're dealing with in AI.
Yeah. So we've got the book coming up. We've got the links in place. Anything? Are you on to book 3, or is it now? Let's spend time with book 2 before we go on.
Yeah, I think it's spend time with book 2, and I think this is a moment where I'm also just like, where do I want to be in the long term? And I think taking some time to like for myself to slow down is one of my goals after this book, where I don't know if I want to be in like a production mindset necessarily right away. I think I kind of want to take some time to think about big questions, engage in more of these conversations, either, in my little office alone or like with other people ideally, and kind of like, have the conversations that we need to have to figure out what's next, but in a less urgent way, hopefully. We'll see.
I love it. Well, thank you again for joining us, folks. The links will be in the show notes, so it's easy to find them. But ethicaledtech.org is for the book. Priten.org is also for Priten's overall presence and other initiatives that he's doing. We really appreciate you joining us again, and hopefully it's not another 100 episodes before you come on back. Maybe we can have some of those philosophical conversations sometime, just us. But we really appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah,
I had a blast. I'm glad I reached out, and I will definitely reach out sooner than 100. That's definitely on my
It'll at least be
yeah.
98. He'll hit us up on 98. That'll be
exactly.
clearly.
Yeah.
All right,
just
folks.
A reminder.
that's a wrap on another week of the HiTech Podcast, empowering minds,
embracing tech. Cheers.
Buckle up, let's ride the wave. Future's calling, tech to crave. HiTech Podcast, light the way. Join the journey, click and play.